We continue to discuss the LA Kings and goaltender Cal Petersen with someone who's played over 500 professional games in net. Former NHL goalie Mike McKenna from dailyfaceoff.com joins us to talk about the Kings goaltending situation. That's next on Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for almost 30 years, for the past 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show. That's been putting out content for the past 16 years. And of course, a passionate LA Kings fan for the past 30 years. We're excited to be joined by a man that played 14 seasons of professional hockey in net, in the ECHL, AHL, and NHL. He had time with the Lightning, Devils, Blue Jackets, Coyotes, Stars, Senators, and Flyers, and is now a contributor to dailyfaceoff.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike McKenna 56. He is Mike McKenna. Mike, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Hey, man. Great. Thanks for the great intro. I always appreciate somebody doing their homework. I also dress games for the Florida Panthers and Vancouver Canucks. Can you believe that? That's 9 NHL teams for somebody that played less than 36. I played 35 games in the NHL, but I dressed games for 9 teams. So it could have been just easier if you said perennial suitcase. That would have probably covered all the ground we needed to do. But thanks so much for having me, Eddie.
Thank you, and my apologies for missing out on a couple of teams there. I wanted to have you on because I know you recently wrote a very detailed article on dailyfaceoff.com about the Kings' issues involving goalie Cal Petersen. And having been a former goalie, obviously you have a great perspective on this. And I definitely want to get into what you wrote. But I want to ask you first, if you recall, when you found out that the Kings had signed Cal Petersen to a 3-year, $15 million extension, did you have an opinion on that? And did you think that he had what it takes to be a number one goalie in the NHL?
I was shocked by it. I looked at that deal and I went, whoa. Not just because it was a great deal for Cal. It really was going to set the benchmark across the NHL, for goaltenders with not a lot of experience being paid relatively big time money. That's a number one contract. $5 million, that's a number one goaltender. And at that stage of the game, Cal hadn't proved it yet. This was signed after, let's see, the 2021 season is when that was signed, I believe it was. And so you're only looking at like 50 games worth of NHL experience when it started to go. And I might be a little bit off on my timing there. But I think it was a huge leap by the Kings. And now you're kind of seeing a regression in salary structure for similar type of deals. Even let's look to Pyotr Kochetkov, who just signed with the Carolina Hurricanes. He got a 4-year deal at $2 million per. And I'll tell you what, if I'm Don Waddell and the GM of the Carolina Hurricanes, I'm thinking, man, even if Kochetkov's game falls off the map, I can handle that $2 million cap hit. But Cal at $5 million, boy, they were hoping he'd take strides in the other direction of what we've seen lately. And maybe he can reclaim that, but it's going to take some work, as we're going to discuss.
Well, I'm sure that GM Rob Blake is going to get the blame if this doesn't work out, because he obviously was the man who signed off on it. But I assume some blame also has to go to people like goalie coach Bill Ranford and maybe some of the other people in the front office who advised Rob Blake that Cal Petersen was eventually going to be the guy.
I think what's tough is looking at it and just thinking that this was ever going to be a value contract. That's the hardest thing for me to wrap my head around, because if it was 3 times $3 million, you could look at it and think, you know what, if Cal plays up to a $5 million standard by the end of it, maybe we're going to think this deal makes a lot of sense. But, as I said before, a starting goalie now costs you $5 million, and he hadn't proven that yet. So ultimately, we don't know who's in the room when these decisions get made. And, Bill Ranford's a guy that I've always looked up to. I think he's done a great job there, and he's developed a ton of goaltenders. And when it comes to contractual stuff, I'd hate to put something at his feet, but I would have to think he at least said, yes, this is a guy who can, and Cal Petersen, who can be a number one, and we expect to be a number one from what we've seen over the past couple of years within Ontario and at the Kings at the NHL level.
So as we mentioned, you've had plenty of time logging time in net at different professional levels, and you wrote, as I mentioned, a very detailed article on dailyfaceoff.com about Cal Petersen's issues, probably this season and last season as well. So specifically, what are some of the issues you see him having, and what are some of the biggest things he needs to correct?
Well, the first off, it is confidence. I mean, he had none this season, it looked like, and it started to spiral downward as the season progressed. And you could see that every goal just looked like he just physically was painful with it. He's staring at his feet, he's shaking his head. You could tell that he's searching. But I think the root of it is really his technical side right now isn't up to what we've seen from other goaltenders in their progression over the last 3 to 4 years. Cal is even something as simple as his basic stance. His glove is very forward. It's like he's shaking hands with somebody rather than out to the side and filling space. And he presents very small in the net for somebody at 6'2". That is not small. His hands are in tight. His chest is a little bent over. He's pretty wide in his stance. That gives visual cues for shooters. They see a lot of net, and they're pretty good at picking that these days. So that's number one. I'd like to see him be able to just tweak his stance to present a bigger target and also have his glove even available quicker. When it's straight ahead of you, you have to move it to your side to be able to make a save. That's an extra step. So that's just one simple thing. But for me, the largest area of concern that I have with Cal is his ability to rotate. Right now, Cal Petersen plays very much like a bubble hockey goalie. And what I mean by that is if you've ever gone to an arcade or you've been at a youth rink somewhere and you got that bubble hockey game and you can move the goalie only goes side to side laterally, right? That goalie does not turn and go on a 45-degree angle to the posts. It doesn't get square to shots. To me, that's Cal Petersen. He spent a huge amount of the time this season and in the past not square to shots. And as shooters have started to figure out that's a weakness in this game, it's been targeted. If you move the puck laterally, get it off your blade short side. If it's going down to a bad angle, put the puck on net, as we saw against the Seattle Kraken, where I think the goal that Daniel Sprong scored down the wing was probably the straw that broke the camel's back for Cal in LA this year, off his shoulder and up and over. So I'd like to see Cal be able to use his post as bumpers, as guidelines, as home base, because right now he spends so much time in front of his posts that when he misses or when he slides, he ends up sliding out into the white ice and he abandons the net, he abandons the blue paint, and then he starts swimming and it just goes downhill from there. So if you want me to boil all that down, I think Cal needs to be more controlled. And I think that really comes from using the post as a guideline, playing within the posts, and really dialing in on how to rotate towards them. That's really important to be able to stay square to shots. If he can do that, I think he can turn his game around fairly quickly. But that takes a lot of work and practice, and then it's got to show up in games.
Well, obviously, when you sign a goaltender to that kind of contract and then ultimately you put him on waivers and send him to the AHL, it's a pretty drastic step. It gets a lot of people's attention. Ultimately, do you feel like that move was the correct move to make? And are you optimistic or pessimistic that this is ultimately going to help him out?
I was surprised by the move just because it's an NHL goaltender being sent to the American League and he's on a big contract. But given the way he's played, no, I'm not surprised. And I think this was a good move by the Kings because of the stage Petersen is at in his career. He's just over 100 games in the NHL. I mean, he should be at the point where he's taking these big steps forward. It hasn't been happening. He's still young enough at 28, it seems old, but he's young in his NHL career, that by taking a step back and going to the American League, one, it should give him a chance to play meaningful games and win, which he has. He's 2-0 in the American League, and he's played great. He's only allowed 3 goals in those games. So it's a confidence boost. But it also takes the pressure off and gives you more time during the week to practice and work closely with goaltending coach that's in Ontario. Miller down there can hopefully grab Petersen and start to work on some of these technical details. So for where Petersen is in the stage of his career, I like this move. I think it'd be a lot different if we were talking about, let's say, Seattle, and they wanted to send Philip Grubauer down to the American League. That's a little bit different, or even a Jack Campbell in Edmonton. They've crossed that bridge. They've been number one goaltenders before. They need to stay there. But for Petersen, he's never been a number one. He's still learning how to grow into that role. So I liked the move. I wasn't surprised that he cleared waivers, especially with that cap hit. And I think it was probably a pretty easy decision with Ontario practicing in El Segundo, just like the parent team. So he's under close supervision.
We're going to have much more with former NHL goalie Mike McKenna in a moment. I do want to remind you real quick, this episode is brought to you by SimpliSafe. This holiday season, give yourself and your family the gift of peace and protection with the #1 rated home security system, SimpliSafe. And right now, SimpliSafe is offering Locked On LA Kings listeners 40% off a new security system. SimpliSafe is easy and convenient to use. You can control your system from your smartphone app, watch crystal clear HD security camera feeds. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture critical evidence and verify threats so you can get higher priority police response. SimpliSafe also has advanced sensors in every room, window, and door to detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. SimpliSafe was named the best home security system of 2022 by U.S. News and World Report. Don't miss your chance to save 40% off any new system at SimpliSafe.com/LockedOnNHL. At SimpliSafe.com/LockedOnNHL. There is no safe like SimpliSafe. More with Mike McKenna, former NHL goalie, and now doing good work for DailyFaceoff.com. And Mike, I've compared goalies to quarterbacks in football. Doesn't matter how good your quarterback is. If he doesn't have time to throw the football, he's probably not going to have success. For a goaltender, obviously you have teammates in front of you. And I know you specifically focus on goaltenders, but how much of the issues the Kings are having with their goalies can be linked to the team defense?
Well, I think it's definitely something that's there. And Todd McClellan has hinted at it before that the team hasn't been good enough defensively in front of their goaltenders. But I think when you really start to take into account advanced metrics, you start to see that this is a goalie problem in LA. And it's not as much on the defense as it is in other areas of the NHL. And so it's not just Petersen. I mean, it's Quick as well. Both of these goaltenders play what I would consider a style of goaltending that 3-4 years ago, you might be able to get away with it. 10 years ago, it was fine. And nowadays, the way the game's played, they're so loose in their movements and without structure that it's really difficult to be consistent. And that's what you're seeing. You'll see a big game from Jonathan Quick every now and then because, man, when he's reading the play and he's feeling the flow, he's still one of the best out there. And Petersen's kind of that same way. They don't have the technical structure of a lot of goalies of today's game, right? If you look at Ilya Sorokin or Igor Shesterkin or some of these top goalies, Cotter Hellebuck, man, they're consistent in how they play. And I think that that's got to be the rubric and the archetype. And without it, these two guys haven't been able to carry the mail like you need. And I think it's the Achilles heel of the Kings right now because that D hasn't been the best in LA. But again, the advanced metrics just suggest that these two goaltenders aren't getting it done. And that passes my eye test as well. I see too many goals where I just say, man, if he hadn't gone paddle down, he probably would have saved that. Or man, if he hit the post instead of going in front of it, he could have saved that as well. Seems like it's happening once a game, maybe twice with the Kings goaltending.
I know something you mentioned in the article you wrote at dailyfaceoff.com about Cal Petersen was maybe suggesting he could do something about, I think it was mid-season goalie school is I think what you called it. Can you expand on what that is?
Well, I think you're actually seeing it right now. You know, it's a chance to really dig in and by taking it the load off his shoulders by going to the American League, that's when you get a chance to work with your goalie coach down there and just take a bigger look at everything. It's without the microscope of the NHL. The NHL every night matters so much. You know, it all matters exactly the same. No game is more or less important, which makes them all essentially of critical importance, right? So, you know, I think when you try to reinvent yourself midseason, it's difficult to do. And it's tough to do it at the NHL where you're trying to perform every night, to implement new things into what you're doing technically, to try to build your confidence back up. So that's part of the reason why I like the move to the American League, to take a little pressure off, let Petersen look at his game and go over it. But for midseason goalie school, it's really pretty simple. I mean, it's retooling your game. It's looking at it and going, you know what? This isn't working. This isn't just a bad streak. This isn't just confidence. We got problems here. Okay. And I think objectively, you have to look at it right now with an 868 in the NHL and this is, he's 5-3-2, Petersen is. Okay. He makes a couple more of these saves that to me were pretty easy. And next sudden you're looking at an 8-3 goalie, you know, or not a 10-0-2 goalie. And all of a sudden it's your number one. So I think that that's really critical, is that you got to be able to self-evaluate and realize when it's not just a confidence thing. There are technical things that need to be improved on. And that's when you do the midseason goalie school. And it's pretty rare, but I've seen it happen with goalies. I've seen it happen with Aaron Dell a couple years in San Jose. It's a couple years ago in San Jose, and he improved his game midseason by essentially doing that same thing. He got stood down for about a week and a half, and he just honed in on the goalie side. He didn't even have to worry about playing games. He got a little bit of a brief rest that way.
Well, obviously, we were all keeping our fingers crossed as Kings fans that this is going to have a positive result. But let's just, for a second, consider that this doesn't work. What do the Kings do if Cal Petersen can't find his game, considering the contract that he has? Do they try and trade him? Do they buy him out? I mean, what are options if this thing doesn't work out?
Well, I think they're stuck with this contract is what it comes down to. I would say that until the end of next year, being the 23-24 season, they're going to have to try to make it work with Cal, because Jonathan Quick doesn't have a contract after this year. The way he's performed, I mean, I don't know where it goes. If he's going to be a number 2 somewhere, maybe he can get by doing that, but he's a guy that needs to play a lot of games. So I don't know where he fits in the mix. Is he still in the Kings in their system here? I'm not sure the answer right now. And I think that Petersen's deal is so big that if you're going to buy it out, it would have to be for the last year of the contract. It'd be surprising if it was the last 2 seasons of it. But if things don't improve, then yeah, you've got to look towards it. And maybe if you're lucky, you can find a team like an Arizona, or a Montreal, or just somebody that'd be willing to eat that big of a deal. But that's starting to become few and far between for goaltenders. You can flush away bigger forward contracts. Goaltenders, it hasn't proven as easy. And that's why I think this deal it's tricky, man. Like it's going to be an albatross unless Petersen manages to improve his play and earn his right to be in that King's crease.
We're focusing obviously on Cal Petersen, but you've mentioned his name a couple of times. And I got to ask you about Jonathan Quick. And there's obviously a relationship here between Quick and Petersen, because Jonathan Quick is aging. That we're looking at Cal Petersen at the very least this year to help carry some of the load if Jonathan Quick was going to be the number 1 guy. So, it's not important just for Cal Petersen in the future, but like I said, for this year, Jonathan Quick is aging and we need somebody to help him, right? He can't carry the load. He's going to turn 37 in January. So there's that perspective of it as well, that he needs to kind of help Jonathan Quick. If Quick is going to be the number 1 guy, I mean, if the Kings can stay in a position where they are, they need Jonathan Quick to have something left in the tank once they get to the end of the season, right?
Right now, Quick's the guy, and he's going to play a lot. There's no way around it. And that is the reason why something drastic needed to happen with Petersen. He needed to go and relieve pressure and gain confidence and retool so that he could provide those quality minutes either behind Quick or in tandem with him. Because who's to say, man, we're talking right now on December 6th. There is still over 4 months, almost 5 months of NHL hockey left in this season. And a lot of things can change. And it's short-sighted to think that either Quick or Petersen won't be injured at some point, given the way things go in the NHL these days. How few teams run with 2 goalies during a season? We're talking less than 5 a year usually. So Petersen has got to improve upon that. I think Quick, honestly, he's kind of in the same boat here. The problem is you're not going to waive Jonathan Quick. You're not doing that to an absolute legend like him. That's no question going to finish his career. In my eyes, I would have to think with the Kings, but I can't guarantee that at all. At the very least, you want to run through this season with him in your crease. He's earned the right to do that. But I do think he's at the stage now where I see so many bad habits that I have real question marks too. I got to cover the first round of the playoffs last year between Edmonton and LA. And, there were moments where Quick just didn't get it done there. And then there were moments where he was phenomenal. But that's what you see now, that consistency. Again, it all comes back to technical side. Without the technical side, the consistency isn't there in today's game.
So I do want to ask you about Jonathan Quick. You mentioned it. He's in the final year of his contract. It was a 10-year deal. And as you mentioned, this is the greatest goalie in Kings history.
Yeah. Can we just say that was a great deal? That was a great contract. It turned out to be. Very rarely does a goalie contract turn out to be phenomenal for the team. This was one that I think absolutely did for the Kings.
Now, I don't know if Jonathan Quick wants to do a Dustin Brown and play his whole career in LA and at the end of it walk away. He's indicated that he would like to continue playing. So how do you think the Kings handle this after the season? I know that's a tough question to ask, but if do they want to bring him back on a short deal? Do you think he would accept coming back on a 1 or 2 year deal? And if so, considering what you're paying Cal Petersen, what would he be looking to get?
Quick's in that weird scenario where it's kind of like Marty Brodeur with the New Jersey Devils, where I think behind closed doors, they're probably saying we absolutely have to turn the page and it's time for us to find new goaltending, right? And that's what Petersen was supposed to be. This was supposed to be the graceful age out of Jonathan Quick. You get Petersen on the big deal and maybe on the back end because Quick's still playing well. We can bring him in on a team-friendly deal at the end to finish off. That could still happen. If Quick still plays number 1 minutes, what can you get him at next season? I don't know. $1 million, $2 million. What do you do for going rate for what you think might be a number 2 or somebody that's on the back end of a deal? But I think the Kings need to objectively look at this and think, who are the best 2 goalies that we can get? And they have to look really hard in the mirror and say, are we willing to look at the greatest goaltender in Kings history who deserves statues and a retired number and is, to me, I mean, 2 Stanley Cups, Conn Smythe, like Jonathan Quick's a Hall of Famer, okay? Like maybe the greatest American goaltender of all time. And what type of deference do you pay to him? That's a really tough decision because Quick deserves to finish his career as a King, but he's also got to earn that right. And that's what's really tough if you're Rob Blake. If Quick finishes this year and suddenly his numbers are up to a 9-10 and they're winning games and everything, you might be able to look in the mirror and say, yep, I think we can bring Quickie in as a number 2. We've got to have a real number 1. We don't know what we're doing with Petersen. That's what makes it tough because that water's real murky. And if you're trying to trade for a number 1 goaltender in today's world, you're going to pay a lot and you don't necessarily know what you're getting. And there's also a transitionary period where that goalie has to get used to the other team that's in front of them. So bottom line, man, this has turned into a bit of a problem for the Kings, which I don't think it was expected several years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. I don't know how familiar you are with the Kings organization as far as goaltenders in their system. But it seems like the general feeling is here, and I know goaltenders take longer to develop. You can't really predict this with certainty, but it seems the feel here is that if this doesn't work out with Cal Petersen, the Kings are probably going to have to go elsewhere to find their next goalie of the future. I don't know. Again, I don't know if you know anything about the Kings goaltenders in their system, but that seems to be the indication that eventually here in the near future, that the next Kings number 1 goalie will probably come from outside the system.
Well, I think that's the logical conclusion because realistically, I've seen Matthew Villalta play. I think he is a fine American League goaltender. I've seen him play bad games in the A. I've seen him play good games in the A. I saw it in person when I was working for the Vegas Golden Knights organization and doing color commentary for the Henderson games. I will say that he's been really good this season so far. But the problem is now you're starting to look 3-4 years into a career where in the American League, he's been okay, on some pretty decent teams in Ontario as well. So can he really take another step? That's a question. I'm not familiar with the prospects that they have drafted. So that's completely out the window for me. And even then you can look at, that's going to be 3 years down the road anyway. So Phoenix Copley, he's a stopgap. He's a quality goaltender. He can play NHL games. He's won games. He spent a full year with the Washington Capitals before. He's more technically sound than Quick or Petersen. I'm not saying he's the answer, but I'm saying he'll probably be more consistent. So yeah, I think the long story short, if things don't turn around with Quick and Petersen, they're going to have to look outside the organization. And with the goalie market the way it is, it's really fickle and you don't know what you're getting. And that makes any general manager nervous, I'm sure.
He is Mike McKenna, former longtime professional goalie, now an analyst for dailyfaceoff.com. You can also see him co-host Daily Faceoff Live as well. Mike, great stuff. I really appreciate your time today. I know that our listeners and our viewers really are going to appreciate what you had to say about this situation. It's going to be really interesting going forward. I'm sure you'll write more about it as we go on, but thank you so much for your time and really appreciate your thoughts on this situation.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'm happy to do it. And I mean, for Kings fans, I hope it turns around. These are 2 quality guys here, Quick and Petersen. It's never, the goalie union's never rooting against one another, but we also have to be objective in how we look at things. And so I hope it turns around for both of them. I hope the Kings keep winning because, man, they're an underdog, and I love underdogs. That was my whole career.
No doubt. Well, again, thank you so much. Best of luck, with what you're doing now at dailyfaceoff.com. I know you do a lot of interesting articles about matchups of the night and things like that with goaltenders and all that. So great stuff. Again, thank you so much for your insight, and hopefully we can chat again sometime.
Sounds good. Thanks, Eddie. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. Take care. All right, that was Mike McKenna. I hope you guys really enjoyed that. That was great stuff. Again, we really appreciate his time, and that was some good stuff. And hopefully, we'll see some of the things that Cal Petersen is doing in the AHL here turn out to help him and ultimately help the LA Kings. Hey, before we say goodbye, I want to invite you to check out Locked On Sports Today. It is a podcast that talks about the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and they have the take of the day. It's available on Odyssey, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. You got anything you guys want to talk about with me? You can always send me an email. It's lockedoneddie@gmail.com. We're on Twitter at Locked On LA Kings, Instagram, Locked On LA Kings as well. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen. And also thank you for watching and listening on the YouTube channel as well. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for watching. And we always close out the show by saying, go Kings, go.